The moonlight cast silver shadows across the manicured gardens of Pemberton House as Miss Sophia Fairfax stepped onto the terrace, seeking refuge from the stifling heat and oppressive atmosphere of the ballroom behind her. The evening's festivities had grown increasingly unbearable as she watched her stepmother parade her before potential suitors like a prize mare at auction, each introduction more humiliating than the last. What she did not expect to find in the secluded rose garden was His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshollow, standing motionless among the flowering bushes with a crystal glass in his hand and an expression of such profound melancholy that it stopped her in her tracks. The moonlight illuminated his aristocratic features, revealing a man who seemed as eager to escape the evening's social obligations as she was. Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ravenshollow, had retreated to the garden to escape the suffocating expectations of London society and his own family's increasingly urgent demands that he choose a bride. At 32, he was considered dangerously close to confirmed bachelorhood, and every social gathering had become a battlefield where ambitious mothers deployed their daughters like weapons in an undeclared war for his title and fortune. Miss Sophia Fairfax was the daughter of a country gentleman whose recent remarriage had brought her to London under the watchful eye of a stepmother determined to make an advantageous match. What she concealed beneath her reputation for quiet dignity was a passionate nature that chafed against the constraints of society's expectations and a secret determination to marry for love rather than convenience, a luxury her modest dowry made increasingly unlikely. "Stay with me until the truth can no longer remain hidden." "I beg your pardon," Sophia said softly, preparing to retreat back to the ballroom. "I did not realize the garden was occupied." Alexander turned at the sound of her voice, and Sophia felt her breath catch as his dark eyes met hers in the moonlight. She had seen him before, of course. It was impossible to move in London society without being aware of the Duke of Ravenshollow, but they had never been formally introduced, never exchanged more than polite nods across crowded ballrooms. "Please," Alexander said, his voice carrying a note of genuine warmth that surprised them both. "Do not let my presence drive you away. The garden is large enough for 2 refugees from social obligation." Sophia hesitated, knowing that propriety demanded she return to the ballroom immediately. An unmarried lady did not linger alone with a gentleman in a moonlit garden, particularly not with a duke whose reputation for avoiding matrimony was matched only by his rumored skill at avoiding the snares set for him by ambitious families. But there was something in his expression, something that spoke of the same restless dissatisfaction she felt with the evening's proceedings, that made her step further into the garden rather than retreat. "Refugees?" she asked, moving to stand beside a marble fountain where the sound of falling water would mask their conversation from any potential eavesdroppers. "Are we not both fleeing the battlefield in there?" Alexander gestured toward the ballroom, where the sounds of music and laughter drifted through the open French doors. "I confess, I have grown weary of being hunted like a fox by every matchmaking mama in London." Sophia could not help but smile at his frank assessment. "And I have grown weary of being displayed like a commodity at market. My stepmother seems determined to auction me to the highest bidder before the season ends. A fate we both seem eager to avoid," Alexander observed, moving closer to where she stood. "Tell me, Miss Fairfax," Sophia supplied, though she knew he was well aware of her identity. The Duke of Ravenshollow made it his business to know everyone who moved in his social circles, if only to avoid the more obvious matrimonial traps. "Miss Fairfax, tell me, what would you choose if you were free to follow your own inclinations rather than society's expectations?" It was a dangerous question, one that invited the kind of honesty that could be used against her if repeated in the wrong quarters. But something in Alexander's manner, in the way he looked at her, as if her answer truly mattered, encouraged candor. "I would choose to marry for affection rather than advantage," Sophia said quietly. I would choose a man who valued my thoughts as well as my dowry, who saw me as a partner rather than an ornament. I would choose love, Your Grace, even if it meant living modestly rather than grandly." Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the moonlight, a romantic notion, and one that society would consider dangerously impractical for a woman in your circumstances. "Sir, and what of you, Your Grace? What would you choose if you were free from duty and expectation?" Alexander's laugh was bitter. "I would choose to marry a woman who wanted me rather than my title, who could love the man beneath the coronet. I would choose someone who challenged me, who made me better than I am alone." He paused, his gaze growing more intense. "I would choose someone like—" He stopped himself before completing the thought, but Sophia felt her pulse quicken at the implication. There was something in the way he was looking at her, something that suggested his words were not merely hypothetical. "Like whom, Your Grace?" Alexander stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could catch the scent of bergamot and sandalwood that clung to his evening clothes. Like someone who would stand in a moonlit garden and speak honestly about her dreams, rather than recite the platitudes she has been taught to offer. The compliment sent warmth flooding through Sophia's chest, followed immediately by a sharp awareness of their situation. They were alone in a secluded garden, standing closer than propriety allowed, engaged in the kind of intimate conversation that could ruin her reputation if discovered. "Your Grace," she said, taking a step backward, "perhaps I should return to the ballroom. My absence will be noticed." "Will it?" Alexander asked, moving to block her retreat. "Or will your stepmother be too busy calculating the advantages of various suitors to notice that you have escaped her watchful eye?" The accuracy of his observation made Sophia laugh, despite her nervousness. "You seem to have a rather cynical view of matrimonial negotiations." "I have considerable experience in avoiding them," Alexander replied with a rueful smile. "Though I confess that tonight, for the first time, I find myself wondering what it would be like to stop running." "Stop running? From marriage, from duty, from the expectations that have governed my life since birth." Alexander's voice grew softer, more intimate. "What it would be like to choose someone for myself, rather than having someone chosen for me." There was something in his tone, something in the way he was looking at her, that made Sophia's heart race with possibilities she dared not name. "And have you, that is there someone you might choose?" Alexander stepped closer again, so close that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the way the moonlight caught in his dark hair. "There might be," he said quietly, "if I were brave enough to reach for what I wanted rather than what was expected of me." The moment stretched between them, charged with electricity and possibility. Sophia knew she should flee, should return to the safety of the ballroom before this dangerous conversation went any further. But she found herself frozen in place, caught between propriety and desire, between safety and the intoxicating possibility that the Duke of Ravenshollow might be suggesting what she thought he was suggesting. "Sophia," Alexander said, her name a whisper in the moonlight. "Your Grace, we should not—" "Should not what?" he asked, reaching up to touch her cheek with gentle fingers. "Should not speak honestly, should not acknowledge what we both feel." "I do not know what you mean," Sophia said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Do you not?" Alexander's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, sending shivers through her entire body. "Then perhaps I should make my meaning clearer." Before Sophia could protest, before she could think or reason or remember all the rules that govern proper behavior, Alexander's lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he were giving her the chance to pull away. But when she did not resist, when her hands came up to rest against his chest rather than push him away, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of suppressed longing and careful distance finally abandoned. Sophia had been kissed before, chaste, proper kisses stolen by eager young men during country dances, but nothing had prepared her for the intensity of Alexander's embrace, for the way his kiss seemed to awaken something in her that she had not known existed. She melted against him, her hands fisting in the fabric of his evening coat, her heart racing with a mixture of passion and terror at her own boldness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Sophia stared up at Alexander with wide eyes, hardly able to believe what had just occurred. "Sophia," he began, his voice rough with emotion, Well, what have we here?" "Oh," the cold, mocking voice cut through the night air like a blade, and both Sophia and Alexander spun toward the source. Standing at the edge of the garden, clearly having witnessed their entire encounter, was Lord Pemberton himself, accompanied by two other gentlemen whose expressions ranged from shock to barely concealed glee. Sophia felt her blood turn to ice as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. She had been caught in a compromising position with the Duke of Ravenshollow, witnessed by three of London society's most influential and most gossipy figures. "Lord Pemberton," Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled, though Sophia could see the tension in his shoulders. "Gentlemen, I trust you are enjoying the evening's entertainment." "Indeed we are, Your Grace," Lord Pemberton replied with a smile that was all teeth and malice. "Though I confess we had not expected to find such intimate entertainment in the garden." "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," Alexander said smoothly, moving slightly to shield Sophia from their stares. "Miss Fairfax was feeling faint from the heat, and I was merely offering assistance." "Assistance," repeated Sir Charles Whitmore, one of Pemberton's companions, with obvious disbelief. "How charitable of you, Your Grace. Though from our vantage point, your assistance appeared rather more personal than medical." Sophia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as she realized that her reputation was being destroyed with every word. In a matter of moments, she had gone from a respectable young lady to a scandal that would be whispered about in every drawing-room in London. "Gentlemen," she said, finding her voice despite her terror, "I assure you that nothing improper—" "My dear Miss Fairfax," Lord Pemberton interrupted with false sympathy, "I fear that what we witnessed was quite definitive. A young lady in the arms of a gentleman in a moonlit garden, engaged in what can only be described as a passionate embrace." "You will not speak of Miss Fairfax in such terms," Alexander said, his voice carrying a warning that made all three men step back involuntarily. "I speak only of what I observed, Your Grace," Lord Pemberton replied smoothly. "As did Sir Charles and Lord Morrison here, three witnesses to what society would certainly consider a compromising situation." The threat was clear. Three respected members of society had witnessed her in Alexander's arms, and their testimony would be enough to destroy her reputation completely unless steps were taken to remedy the situation. "What exactly are you suggesting, Pemberton?" Alexander asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I am suggesting nothing, Your Grace. I'm merely observing that when a gentleman compromises a lady's reputation, honor demands that he take steps to rectify the situation." "Marriage," Sophia whispered, the word falling from her lips like a stone. "Indeed," Lord Pemberton confirmed with obvious satisfaction. "Unless, of course, Your Grace would prefer to see Miss Fairfax's reputation destroyed by the inevitable gossip that will follow our observations." Sophia felt the trap closing around them with inexorable precision. Alexander had stolen a kiss in a moment of passion, and now society was demanding that he pay for that moment with his freedom. She would be forced into a marriage with a man who had been cornered into offering for her, a union that would be resented by him and pitied by everyone else. "There must be another solution," she said desperately. "Surely, if we all agree to remain silent—" "My dear girl," Sir Charles said with false kindness, "you cannot seriously expect three gentlemen to lie about what they have witnessed. Our honor would not permit such deception." "Your honor," Alexander said coldly, "seems remarkably flexible when it suits your purposes." "Careful, Your Grace," Lord Pemberton warned. "You are in no position to question anyone's honor. The question now is whether you will do the honorable thing by Miss Fairfax, or whether you will allow her to face the consequences of your Momentary lapse in judgment. Alexander looked at Sophia, seeing the fear and despair in her eyes, the way she was struggling to maintain her composure in the face of social ruin. He had done this to her. His moment of weakness, his inability to resist the temptation she represented, had destroyed her reputation, as surely as if he had publicly announced her disgrace. "Of course," he said quietly, "I will do whatever honor demands." "Excellent," Lord Pemberton said with obvious satisfaction. "Then I believe congratulations are in order. Miss Fairfax, you are to be a duchess. How fortunate for you." As the three men departed to spread the news of the engagement that had just been forced upon them, Sophia and Alexander stood alone in the garden where their lives had been forever altered by a single stolen kiss. "Sophia," Alexander said softly, "I am so sorry. I never intended—" "I know," she said, her voice barely audible. "But intentions matter little now, do they? We are trapped, Your Grace, bound by a moment of madness that neither of us can undo." "Perhaps," Alexander said, though his voice lacked conviction. "But Sophia, I want you to know, the kiss, the feelings that prompted it, those were real. Whatever happens now, whatever marriage we are forced into, that moment was genuine." Sophia looked up at him, seeing sincerity in his dark eyes, seeing regret and something that might have been hope. "And now we must discover whether a marriage born of scandal can become something more than mere obligation." As they walked back toward the ballroom together, both understanding that their lives had been irrevocably changed, Sophia wondered if it was possible for love to grow from such inauspicious beginnings. She was about to become a duchess, but at what cost? And could a man who had been forced to marry her ever truly come to love her? The answers to those questions would determine whether their marriage would be a prison or a paradise. But for now, all she could do was face the consequences of a stolen kiss that had changed everything. The announcement of their engagement appeared in the Times the following morning, accompanied by the kind of breathless speculation that suggested the entire ton was already aware of the scandalous circumstances that had prompted it. Sophia read the notice over breakfast in her stepmother's townhouse, still hardly able to believe that her name was linked so publicly with the Duke of Ravenshollow's. The Duke of Ravenshollow and Miss Sophia Fairfax announced their engagement with the blessing of their families, the formal notice read. The wedding will take place by special license within the fortnight. Within the fortnight. The haste of the arrangement would only fuel more speculation about the reasons for their sudden betrothal, but Sophia understood the necessity. The longer they waited, the more time society would have to dissect and discuss the circumstances of their engagement. "My dear Sophia," her stepmother said, entering the breakfast room with an expression of barely contained triumph, "you have exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. A duke, and such a wealthy, influential duke at that." "Yes," Sophia replied quietly. "How fortunate for me." Her stepmother either missed or chose to ignore the irony in her tone. "Indeed it is. Though I confess myself curious about how this attachment developed so rapidly. You and His Grace were barely acquainted, and yet here you are, engaged to be married within days of your first real conversation." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks as she remembered exactly how their attachment had developed. Sometimes these things happen quickly when two people understand each other. "Understanding," her stepmother mused. "Yes, I suppose that is one way to describe it, though I suspect there is more to this story than you are revealing." Before Sophia could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a visitor, whose presence sent her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshollow," the butler announced, and Alexander entered the breakfast room with the careful formality of a man fulfilling his obligations. "Your Grace," Sophia's stepmother said, rising to curtsy with obvious delight. "How wonderful to see you! I was just congratulating Sophia on her remarkable good fortune." "Indeed," Alexander replied, his gaze finding Sophia's across the room, "though I believe I am the fortunate one in this arrangement." The gallant response was exactly what society expected to hear, but Sophia could detect the strain beneath his polite words. He was playing his role as the devoted fiancé, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. "I wonder if I might have a private word with my fiancé?" Alexander asked with perfect courtesy. "There are certain arrangements we need to discuss." "Of course, Your Grace," Sophia's stepmother said, though her expression suggested she would have preferred to remain and oversee their conversation. "I shall be in the morning room if you need anything." When they were alone, Alexander's formal demeanor softened slightly, though he maintained the careful distance that propriety required, even between an engaged couple. "How are you faring?" he asked quietly. "I imagine this has all been rather overwhelming." "I am managing," Sophia replied, though the truth was that she felt as if her entire world had been turned upside down. "And you? How are you adjusting to our new circumstances?" Alexander moved to the window, gazing out at the London street with the air of a man contemplating his fate. "I have been better," he admitted. "Though I want you to know, Sophia, that I do not blame you for what happened. The fault is entirely mine." "Is it? Because I seem to recall being a willing participant in that moment." Alexander turned back to face her, his expression troubled. "You were an innocent young lady who was taken advantage of by a man who should have known better. I allowed my feelings to override my judgment, and now you are paying the price for my weakness." "Your feelings?" Sophia asked, her pulse quickening at the admission. "What feelings?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. "I have been aware of you for some time, Sophia. Aware of your intelligence, your grace, your refusal to be diminished by circumstances that would defeat a lesser woman. Last night, when I found you in the garden, when we spoke so honestly, I forgot myself." "You forgot yourself?" "I forgot that I am a duke with responsibilities and obligations that extend far beyond my personal desires. I forgot that you are a respectable young lady who deserves better than to be compromised by a man's momentary lapse in judgment." Alexander's voice grew more intense. "I forgot everything, except how much I wanted to kiss you." The honesty in his confession sent warmth flooding through Sophia's chest. "And now, do you regret it?" "I regret the consequences," Alexander said carefully. "I regret that you have been forced into an engagement you never sought, that your reputation has been compromised, that you will now be bound to a man who was essentially coerced into offering for you. But do you regret the kiss itself?" Alexander met her eyes directly, and Sophia saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. "No," he said quietly, "I do not regret the kiss. I regret everything that led to it and everything that followed from it. But the kiss itself, that was the most honest moment I have experienced in years." Before Sophia could respond to this remarkable admission, they were interrupted by the arrival of another visitor, one whose presence filled Sophia with dread. "Lady Pemberton," the butler announced, and Alexander's mother swept into the breakfast room, with the regal bearing of a woman accustomed to command. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenshollow was everything Sophia had expected and feared: elegant, imposing, and clearly displeased by the circumstances that had led to her son's engagement. Her assessment of Sophia was swift and thorough, taking in every detail of her appearance and finding it wanting. "Miss Fairfax," Lady Pemberton said with a curtsy that was perfectly correct, but notably cool. "How interesting to finally make your acquaintance." "Your Grace," Sophia replied, offering her own curtsy and hoping her nervousness was not too obvious. "I am honored by your visit. Indeed, I felt it necessary to meet the young woman who has captured my son's attention so dramatically." Lady Pemberton's tone suggested that captured was perhaps too generous a term for what had occurred. "Mother," Alexander said, his voice carrying a warning, "I trust you will extend every courtesy to my fiancé." "Of course, dear. Though I confess myself curious about the suddenness of this attachment. You and Miss Fairfax were barely acquainted, and yet here you are, engaged to be married within days. One might almost think there were extenuating circumstances." The delicate probe was delivered with the skill of a woman experienced in extracting information without appearing to pry. Sophia felt her cheeks burn as she realized that Alexander's mother suspected exactly what those extenuating circumstances might be. "Sometimes," Alexander said smoothly, "when two people recognize a genuine connection, there seems little point in delay." "A genuine connection," Lady Pemberton repeated thoughtfully. "How romantic. And though I hope you have given proper consideration to the practical aspects of marriage, particularly marriage to someone of Miss Fairfax's background." The subtle insult was delivered with perfect politeness, but its meaning was unmistakable. Sophia was being reminded of her inferior social position, her modest dowry, her unsuitability to become a duchess. "Miss Fairfax's background," Alexander said coldly, "is perfectly respectable. Her father was a gentleman of good family, and she herself is everything I could wish for in a wife." "Everything you could wish for," his mother mused. "How fortunate that your wishes align so perfectly with necessity." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Lady Pemberton clearly suspected that the engagement was the result of scandal rather than romance, and she was not bothering to hide her disapproval. "Mother," Alexander said, his voice carrying a clear warning, "I believe we understand each other." "Indeed we do, dear, indeed we do." Lady Pemberton turned back to Sophia with a smile that was all sharp edges. "Miss Fairfax, I hope you understand the responsibilities that come with being a duchess. The position requires particular qualities that not everyone possesses." "I am prepared to learn whatever is necessary," Sophia replied with quiet dignity. "And I hope to prove myself worthy of the honor." "Worthy," Lady Pemberton repeated. "Yes, I suppose that remains to be seen." After the Dowager Duchess departed, leaving behind an atmosphere of tension and barely concealed hostility, Sophia and Alexander sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. "I apologize for my mother's directness," Alexander said finally. "She has never been one to hide her opinions." "She suspects the truth," Sophia said quietly, "about what really happened last night. Perhaps. But suspicion is not proof, and even if she knew the entire story, she would not dare to make it public. The scandal would reflect as poorly on our family as on yours." "But she will never accept me, will she? I will always be the woman who trapped her son into marriage." Alexander moved to sit beside her on the small sofa, careful to maintain proper distance, but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his expression. "Sophia, I need you to understand something. You did not trap me into anything. I kissed you because I wanted to, because I had been wanting to for longer than I care to admit. The consequences were unfortunate, but the action itself was my choice. A choice you now regret? A choice that has led to complications I never intended," Alexander corrected. "But Sophia, if we are to make this marriage work, and I am determined that we shall, then we must be honest with each other about what we feel, what we want, what we hope to build together." "And what do you hope to build?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "I hope to build a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I hope to prove to you that a marriage born of necessity can become something beautiful if both parties are willing to work toward that goal. And if I am not willing, if I cannot forgive you for the position you have placed me in, then I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness," Alexander said simply. "Because, Sophia, whatever brought us to this point, I am not sorry that you are going to be my wife. Surprised, perhaps, concerned about the circumstances, certainly, but not sorry. At this moment, would you have told the truth?" Sophia studied his face, seeing sincerity there, seeing something that might have been hope. "Alexander," she said softly, "I need you to know. I am not sorry either. Frightened, overwhelmed, uncertain about the future, but not sorry." The admission seemed to surprise them both. Alexander's expression lightened for the first time since their engagement had been announced, and Sophia felt a flutter of something that might have been optimism. "Then perhaps," Alexander said, reaching out to take her hand in his. "We have a foundation upon which to build something worthwhile." "Perhaps we do," Sophia agreed, allowing her fingers to intertwine with his. "Though I suspect it will not be easy." "The best things rarely are," Alexander replied. "But Sophia, I give you my word, I will do everything in my power to make you happy as my wife. I will protect you, cherish you, and do my utmost to prove myself worthy of the trust you are placing in me." "And I promise to try," Sophia said quietly. "To try to forgive, to try to trust, to try to build something beautiful from these unusual circumstances." As they sat together in the morning light streaming through the breakfast room windows, their hands joined and their futures intertwined by scandal and circumstance, both of them understood that they were embarking on a journey with no guarantees of success. But for the first time since that fateful kiss in the moonlit garden, Sophia felt a spark of hope that their marriage might become something more than mere obligation. Alexander had shown her honesty, vulnerability, and a determination to make their union work that suggested genuine feeling beneath the social necessity. Perhaps, she thought as she looked into his dark eyes, love could indeed grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Perhaps a marriage born of scandal could become a partnership built on affection. Perhaps their stolen kiss had not destroyed her future after all, but had instead opened the door to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Only time would tell whether that hope was justified, but for now it was enough to sustain her through the challenges that lay ahead. The wedding preparations proceeded with the efficiency of a military campaign, driven by the need to formalize their union before society could fully digest the scandalous circumstances of their engagement. Sophia found herself swept along in a whirlwind of fittings, consultations, and arrangements, all overseen by her stepmother's barely contained excitement and Alexander's mother's thinly veiled disapproval. But it was not until 3 days before the ceremony that the true extent of their difficulties became apparent. Sophia was in the modiste's shop for her final fitting when her stepmother arrived with news that drained the color from her face. "My dear," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, "we have a problem, a serious one." "What sort of problem?" Sophia asked, though the expression on her stepmother's face suggested she already knew the answer would be devastating. "Lord Pemberton has been talking about the circumstances of your engagement, about what he witnessed in the garden." Her stepmother's voice dropped to a whisper. "He is claiming that what he saw was far more compromising than a simple kiss." Sophia felt her blood turn to ice. "What exactly is he claiming?" "He is suggesting that your intimacy with the Duke was of a nature that makes this marriage not just advisable, but absolutely necessary." The implication was clear, and Sophia felt sick as she realized what Lord Pemberton was suggesting. "That is a lie," she said fiercely. "Nothing of that nature occurred. You know it did not." "I know that, dear, but Lord Pemberton is claiming otherwise. He is telling anyone who will listen that he witnessed, well, let us say he is painting a picture of your encounter that goes far beyond a stolen kiss." Sophia sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the accusation. If Lord Pemberton's version of events gained credence, she would be branded not just as a woman who had been compromised, but as one who had engaged in the most serious impropriety possible for an unmarried lady. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would he do such a thing?" "Because," came a new voice from the doorway, "he stands to gain considerably from the destruction of your reputation." Both women turned to see Alexander entering the shop, his expression grim with news of his own. "I have just come from my club, where I was treated to a detailed account of Lord Pemberton's creative interpretation of recent events." "Your Grace," Sophia's stepmother said, rising to curtsy, "thank goodness you are here. Perhaps you can explain why Lord Pemberton would spread such vicious lies about my stepdaughter." Alexander's jaw tightened with controlled anger. "Because Lord Pemberton has significant gambling debts that he cannot pay, and he has been promised a substantial sum by certain parties if he can complicate our marriage." Complicated how? Sophia asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. By creating enough scandal to force me to withdraw from the engagement, leaving you ruined and him free to collect his payment from those who would prefer to see me married to someone more suitable to their purposes. Sophia felt the trap closing around them with inexorable precision. And who would pay him to destroy our engagement? Alexander's expression grew darker. My cousin, Lord Pemberton, who stands to inherit the dukedom if I die without an heir. He has been working with certain political enemies who would prefer to see me discredited and removed from positions of influence. The revelation hit Sophia like a physical blow. Their engagement was not just a personal matter, but a political one, with enemies willing to destroy her reputation to achieve their goals. But surely, her stepmother said desperately, people will not believe such accusations without proof. They do not need proof, Alexander said grimly. They need only enough doubt to make our marriage untenable. If Pemberton's version of events gains credence, Sophia will be seen as a woman of loose morals who trapped me into marriage through the most serious impropriety. The scandal would make it impossible for me to maintain my position in society or government. And if you withdraw from the engagement to protect your reputation, Sophia asked quietly, then you will be ruined completely, branded as a woman who engaged in improper conduct and was then abandoned by the man who compromised her. Alexander's voice was heavy with the weight of their impossible situation. Either way, our enemies achieve their goal. Sophia rose from her chair, moving to the window where she could look out at the busy London street and try to process the magnitude of what they faced. So we are trapped, she said quietly. If we marry, the scandal will destroy your position. If we do not marry, it will destroy my reputation. There is no solution that does not result in someone's ruin. There is one solution, Alexander said quietly, and something in his tone made both women turn to look at him. What solution? Sophia asked, though she was not certain she wanted to hear the answer. We could elope, Alexander said simply. Leave London immediately, marry quietly in Scotland, and present society with a fait accompli. By the time we return, the immediate scandal will have died down, and our enemies will have lost their opportunity to prevent the marriage. Sophia stared at him, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. Elope? But your grace, that would only fuel more speculation about the reasons for our haste. Perhaps. But it would also demonstrate that we are united in our determination to marry despite any obstacles. Sometimes, Sophia, the best way to defeat scandal is to face it head-on rather than allowing it to fester in whispers and speculation. And your family? Your mother will never forgive such a breach of propriety. Alexander's smile was rueful. My mother already disapproves of our engagement. I doubt an elopement will significantly worsen her opinion of the situation. Sophia's stepmother looked between them with growing alarm. This is madness. You cannot seriously be considering such a course of action. The scandal would be enormous. The scandal already is enormous, Alexander pointed out. The question is whether we allow our enemies to control the narrative or whether we take control of it ourselves. Sophia moved away from the window, her mind racing through the implications of what Alexander was proposing. An elopement would indeed cause scandal, but it would also demonstrate their commitment to each other in a way that might actually strengthen their position in the long run. When? She asked quietly. Tonight, Alexander said without hesitation. My carriage will be waiting at the corner of your street at midnight. We can be in Scotland within 2 days, married within 3. By the time London society realizes what has happened, it will be too late for anyone to prevent it. Alexander, Sophia said, using his given name for the first time since their engagement. Are you certain about this? Once we take this step, there will be no going back. I am certain that I would rather face scandal as your husband than allow our enemies to destroy what we have built together, Alexander replied firmly. The question is whether you trust me enough to take this leap with me. Sophia looked into his dark eyes, seeing determination there, seeing a man who was willing to risk everything to protect her and their future together. It was not the romantic proposal she had once dreamed of, but it was something perhaps more valuable, a demonstration of genuine commitment in the face of overwhelming obstacles. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I will come with you." Alexander's relief was visible, and for the first time since their engagement had been announced, his smile reached his eyes. "Then pack only what you need for the journey. Everything else can be sent for later." As they made their final preparations for the elopement that would either save or destroy them both, Sophia reflected on how much her life had changed since that fateful kiss in the moonlit garden. She had begun as a respectable young lady facing an uncertain future, and she was about to become a duchess through the most scandalous means possible. But as she looked at Alexander, seeing the man who was willing to risk his reputation and position to protect her, she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with something deeper, more precious. Perhaps she was falling in love with her reluctant fiancé. Perhaps their marriage, born of scandal and necessity, might indeed become something beautiful. The thought both thrilled and terrified her, but as midnight approached and their elopement drew near, Sophia knew that she was ready to discover what the future might hold for a duke and the woman he had been forced to marry. Their enemies had intended to destroy them, but perhaps instead they had given them the greatest gift of all, the chance to choose each other freely, without the constraints of society's expectations or family pressure. As she prepared to run away with the Duke of Ravenshollow, Sophia could not help but smile at the irony. In trying to prevent their marriage, their enemies had instead created the circumstances that might allow it to become a true love match. The game was far from over, but for the first time since that stolen kiss had changed everything, Sophia felt as if they might actually win. Tartar, truth and consequence. The elopement went exactly as Alexander had planned. At the stroke of midnight, Sophia slipped from her stepmother's house with nothing but a small valise and the clothes on her back, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration as she climbed into Alexander's waiting carriage. They traveled through the night in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the magnitude of what they were doing. By dawn, they were well beyond London's reach, racing north toward Scotland and a future that neither could predict. "Do you regret it?" Alexander asked as they stopped to change horses at a coaching inn somewhere in the English countryside. "Ask me again in a week," Sophia replied, though there was a smile in her voice that suggested her answer might be more positive than her words indicated. They were married 3 days later in a small church in Gretna Green, with only the local minister and his wife as witnesses. It was not the grand ceremony that society would have expected for a duke's wedding, but as Alexander slipped his grandmother's ring onto Sophia's finger and spoke the vows that made her his duchess, she felt a completeness that had nothing to do with pomp and everything to do with the quiet sincerity in his voice. "I, Alexander, take thee, Sophia, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." And when he kissed her to seal their marriage, it was with the same passion that had started their entire adventure, but this time there were no witnesses to scandalize, no consequences to fear. This time, the kiss belonged entirely to them. They spent their wedding night in a modest inn that was a far cry from the luxury Alexander was accustomed to, but as he held his new wife in his arms, he could not remember ever being happier. "Sophia," he said softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, "I need you to know, whatever brought us to this moment, I am grateful for it. I am grateful for you. Even though I trapped you into marriage," she asked with gentle teasing. "You did not trap me," Alexander said firmly. "If anything, you freed me. Freed me from a life of duty without joy, obligation without love, existence without purpose. And what is your purpose now?" "To make you happy," Alexander said simply, "to prove myself worthy of the gift you have given me by becoming my wife." "Oops. What gift is that?" "The chance to love and be loved in return," Alexander replied, his voice rough with emotion. "The opportunity to build something beautiful with someone who sees me as more than just a title and a fortune." Sophia turned in his arms, studying his face in the candlelight. "And do you love me, I mean?" "Completely," Alexander said without hesitation. "I have been falling in love with you since that first night in the garden, perhaps even before that. Every conversation, every stolen glance, every moment we have shared has only deepened what I feel for you." "I love you too," Sophia whispered, the words coming easier than she had expected. "I love the man who was willing to risk everything to protect me, who chose to marry me, not because he had to, but because he wanted to." When they returned to London a week later, they found exactly the chaos they had expected. The Ton was buzzing with speculation about their elopement. Their enemies were furious at having their plans thwarted, and Alexander's mother was surprisingly philosophical about the entire situation. "Well," Lady Pemberton said when they called upon her the day after their return, "at least you have demonstrated that your attachment is genuine. No man elopes with a woman he does not truly wish to marry." "Mother," Alexander said carefully, "I hope you can find it in your heart to welcome Sophia into our family." "Ah, my dear boy," his mother replied with a smile that was warmer than any she had previously shown Sophia. "Any woman brave enough to elope with you and clever enough to outmaneuver our enemies has already proven herself worthy of being a duchess. I may not approve of your methods, but I cannot argue with your results." "Ndassen." The acceptance was more than Sophia had dared to hope for, and she felt tears of relief gather in her eyes as she realized that she might actually find a place in Alexander's family after all. But their greatest vindication came from an unexpected source. Lord Pemberton, the man who had witnessed their first kiss and forced their engagement, was discovered to have been embezzling funds from his own estate to pay his gambling debts. The scandal that erupted around his arrest made their elopement seem positively respectable by comparison. "It seems," Alexander observed as they read the newspaper accounts of Pemberton's disgrace, "that our enemies have been rather thoroughly discredited." "And we have been vindicated," Sophia added with satisfaction. "Society loves a romance, especially one that ends with the villains getting their comeuppance." Indeed, their love story had captured London's imagination in a way that neither had expected. The tale of the Duke who had stolen a kiss and then eloped with the woman he loved had become the stuff of romantic legend, repeated in drawing rooms and ballrooms throughout the city. "Do you think," Sophia asked as they walked together through the gardens of Ravenshollow House, "that we would have found our way to each other without the scandal? Without being forced together by circumstances?" Alexander considered the question seriously. "I like to think we would have," he said finally, "but I confess I am grateful that we did not have to wait to find out. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unlikely circumstances. Like a stolen kiss in a moonlit garden?" "Exactly like that," Alexander agreed, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that was no longer stolen, but freely given and joyfully received. As they stood together in the garden where their love had first bloomed, surrounded by the roses that had witnessed their transformation from strangers to lovers to husband and wife, Sophia marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect happiness. She had thought that stolen kiss would destroy her future. Instead, it had given her everything she had ever dreamed of: a husband who loved her, a position that allowed her to make a difference in the world, and a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "Alexander," she said softly, "do you remember what you said that first night, about choosing someone who would challenge you, who would make you better than you are alone?" "I remember. Have I done that? Made you better?" Alexander's smile was radiant. "My darling wife, you have made me the man I was always meant to be. You have given me purpose, joy, and a love that surpasses anything I ever thought possible. And you have given me the same, Sophia replied, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. You have shown me that love is worth any risk, any scandal, any challenge that the world might throw at us. As the sun set over London, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that matched the flowers surrounding them, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow held each other close and celebrated the love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning. Their marriage had been born of scandal, forged in controversy, and tested by enemies who had sought to destroy them. But it had emerged stronger for having been challenged, more precious for having been fought for, and more beautiful for having been chosen rather than simply accepted. The stolen kiss that had started it all had indeed changed everything, but not in the way either of them had expected. Instead of destroying their futures, it had created a love story that would be remembered long after the scandal that birthed it had been forgotten. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. 1 year later, the gardens of Ravenshollow House were in full bloom for the first anniversary of the most famous elopement in recent London memory. Sophia walked among the roses with her infant son in her arms, marveling at how much her life had changed since that fateful night when a stolen kiss had altered her destiny forever. "He has your eyes," Alexander said, joining them in the garden with the easy familiarity of a man completely comfortable in his role as husband and father. "And your stubborn chin," Sophia replied with a laugh, adjusting little James's blanket against the morning breeze. "I fear he will be quite formidable when he grows up." Good," Alexander said firmly, dropping a kiss on both his wife's head and his son's. "The world needs more formidable people. Look what one accomplished for me." Sophia smiled at the compliment, though her attention was caught by a familiar figure approaching through the garden paths. Lady Pemberton, now a devoted grandmother who had completely embraced her daughter-in-law, walked toward them with a letter in her hand and an expression of barely contained excitement. "My dears," she said without preamble, "you will never guess what has arrived in the morning post." "Good news, I hope?" Alexander asked, taking the letter from his mother's outstretched hand. "The very best news," Lady Pemberton confirmed. "An invitation to the Queen's drawing room, specifically requesting the presence of the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow and their son. It seems Her Majesty wishes to meet the couple whose love story has become the talk of Europe." Sophia felt a flutter of nervous excitement. A royal invitation was the ultimate mark of social acceptance, proof that their unconventional beginning had been not just forgiven, but celebrated by the highest levels of society. "The Queen wishes to meet us?" she asked, hardly able to believe it. "Indeed," Alexander said, reading the formal invitation with obvious satisfaction. "It seems our romance has captured the royal imagination. We are to be presented as an example of how true love can triumph over any obstacle." As they made their preparations for their royal presentation, Sophia reflected on the irony of their situation. A year ago, she had been a woman facing social ruin because of a stolen kiss. Now she was being celebrated by the Queen herself as an example of romantic triumph. "Do you ever wonder," she asked Alexander as they prepared for bed that night, "what would have happened if Lord Pemberton had not witnessed our kiss? If we had been allowed to court properly, without scandal or force?" "Never," Alexander replied without hesitation, pulling her into his arms, "because I cannot imagine any other path leading to such perfect happiness. Every challenge we faced, every obstacle we overcame, every moment of uncertainty, it all led to this, to you, to our son, to the life we have built together. Even the scandal, even the forced engagement, especially those," Alexander said with a smile, "because they taught us that our love was strong enough to survive anything, that we were willing to fight for each other, no matter what the cost." Sophia nestled closer to her husband, marveling at the truth of his words. Their love had indeed been tested by fire and had emerged stronger for the testing. What had begun as a moment of weakness had become the foundation of a marriage built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unshakable trust. "Alexander," she said softly, "do you remember what you told me that first night? About wanting to choose someone for yourself rather than having someone chosen for you?" "I remember. Did you choose me, or did circumstances choose for both of us?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think," he said finally, "that circumstances gave us the opportunity to choose each other. The kiss, the scandal, the forced engagement, those were just the means by which fate brought us together. But the love we built, the marriage we created, the life we share, those were our choices, made freely and with full knowledge of what we were choosing. And you would choose me again, knowing everything that would follow. Every time," Alexander said without hesitation, "in every lifetime, in every circumstance, I would choose you. You are the best choice I have ever made, Sophia. The only choice that truly mattered." As they held each other in the darkness of their bedroom, surrounded by the peace and security of their shared love, Sophia thought about the young woman she had been a year ago, frightened, uncertain, facing a future that seemed to hold nothing but obligation and compromise. That woman could never have imagined the happiness she had found, the love she had discovered, the partnership she had built with a man who had been forced to marry her but had chosen to love her. Their story had begun with a stolen kiss in a moonlit garden, continued through scandal and elopement, and had culminated in a love that had captured the imagination of a nation. It was not the conventional romance she had once dreamed of, but it was something far more precious, a love that had been tested, proven, and celebrated. "Sophia," Alexander whispered in the darkness, "thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to let me steal that kiss, for trusting me enough to elope with me, for loving me enough to build this beautiful life with me." His arms tightened around her, "for showing me that sometimes the most wonderful things come from the most unexpected beginnings." "Thank you," Sophia replied, "for being the man who was worth the scandal, for proving that love really can conquer all obstacles, for making me believe in fairy tales again." As sleep claimed them both, wrapped in each other's arms and surrounded by the evidence of their happiness, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow rested secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, a love that had transformed scandal into triumph, obligation into joy, and a stolen kiss into a lifetime of happiness. Their enemies had intended to destroy them with that forced engagement, but instead they had given them the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover that love, when it is real and fought for and cherished, can indeed overcome any obstacle the world might place in its path. The stolen kiss that had started it all had been worth every moment of scandal, every challenge they had faced, every risk they had taken, because it had led them to each other and to a love that would last for all the seasons of their lives. Which choice would you have made? If this tale of stolen kisses, forced marriages, and love that conquered scandal captivated you, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more passionate historical romances. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have eloped to escape the scandal? Could you have found true love in a marriage born of necessity? Your engagement helps us bring you more stories, where love triumphs over every obstacle and transforms the most challenging circumstances into fairy tale endings. Thank you for joining us in the moonlit gardens of London, and until our next romantic